The Long Road by Wolfland. Steven's voice echoed around the cavern as he called out to his partner. "Beldam, get ready for the next attack!" The wild Makuhita dusted itself off from Beldam's takedown attack and took an offensive stance. "That's an arm thrust! Keep moving until it stops swinging!" Beldam chattered in reply as Makuhita lunged, hand outstretched. It ducked under the first blow and bobbed around the second, and Steven frowned. While this was valuable training to learn how to dodge fighting-type moves, the wild Makuhita were sloppy compared to their gym-trained counterparts. He and Beldam would need to step up their training even further if they were to truly be able to stand a chance at a rematch. Since setting foot inside Granite Cave, Steven found that it was full of surprises. The dark, cramped interior he had been expecting in a sea cave such as this was nowhere to be found. Instead, the main chamber swelled into an enormous volume, with a ceiling that soared high overhead. Whatever sounds Steven expected to hear were drowned out by the murmur of the ocean, which seemingly came from the cavern walls themselves. The roof of the cave was punctuated with multiple openings, worn smooth from the wind and waves, and sunlight filtered down into the chamber, where it danced and sparkled in the many pools of water that dotted the cave floor. With such a bright, open structure, it was no wonder that the cave was practically teeming with Pokemon that wouldn't normally call a cave their home. Eager to take advantage of the unique Pokemon population, Steven and Beldam dove headfirst into challenging any fighting-type Pokemon they could find. Soon, they found themselves delving deeper and deeper into the cave, always alert to find the next opponent. This Makuhita would mark their 8th battle, but as he watched the Makuhita's movements, he found himself frowning again. The wild Pokemon had begun to prepare another attack, but instead of striking out, it hesitated, cocking its head to one side before casting a short glance over its shoulder. Beldam blinked as it too noticed the strange behavior, but Steven shook his head and redoubled his focus. They couldn't afford to get distracted, even if it was just a wild Pokemon. "Beldam, finish it with takedown!" His partner hesitated, as if it was considering something. Confusion flashed across Steven's face. Beldam had never shown itself to be disobedient before, but even as the thought crossed his mind, Beldam chirped and launched its attack. But as Beldam closed in on its opponent, the wild Pokemon did something Steven had never seen before. Instead of standing its ground, the Makuhita turned tail and fled from Beldam's attack. "What? Beldam, after it!" Steven had become fixated so single-mindedly on their training that he had forgotten to always remain attentive to his surroundings. He should have remembered the warning in the passage about sea caves that he had read on the boat ride to Dewford. He should have paid more attention to the nervous way Beldam had chattered as it glanced toward the large opening in the cavern floor before it attacked. He should have guessed what was about to happen from the way the faint gurgle of the sea amplified into a dull roar in a matter of moments. But he didn't. And because of that, the only thing he could recall when the wave pushed through the nearby blowhole was chaos. In an instant, Steven's world was swallowed by roaring and crashing and tumbling. Fighting for air and trying not to swallow too much seawater at the same time, flying for purchase on anything that could hold him back against the rush of water, and coming up empty. The sharp sting of raking against the roughly hewn passage walls as the force of the wave pushed him deeper into the heart of the cave. The sensation of falling, the jolting lurch of his stomach as the smooth cavern stone vanished from beneath his haphazard trajectory. How quickly the darkness painted the walls the same color as the floor as he fell. And even if he knew which way was up, he couldn't have seen how quickly the stone rushed up to greet him. Unable to brace for impact, the crunching blow of suddenly meeting the cavern floor below sent starbursts of pain flashing across eyes that were squeezed shut against the terror of it all. Gently tumbling as the last of the water flooded around his limp form, slowly being nudged along in a tide until coming to rest with finality. And then, silence. He wasn't entirely sure how much time had passed since he'd managed to roll himself onto his stomach. However long it was, it gave the inquisitive Auron enough time to regather its courage and make another appearance at Stephen's side. Except it wasn't empty-handed. Stephen blinked as he propped himself up with one arm. Is that my pack? He was puzzled as to how Auron managed to find it in the first place, or even how it knew that it belonged to him, but he was too thrilled to inquire any further. Auron just delivered his lifeline out of here. Gritting his teeth, he tried to pick himself off the ground, only to find it a lot more difficult than he imagined. He gasped as his hip made its displeasure known, but then he felt something cool and sturdy press into his chest from below. Auron had wedged itself under him and pressed slowly upward, balancing Stephen's unsteady ascent. With Auron's help, Stephen finally found himself upright, and whatever relief he felt was quickly snuffed as his gaze settled on the ladder at the far end of the passage. Faint light spilled down from above, bathing his escape route in some sort of heavenly blessing, and he scoffed at the irony of the situation. "You've got to be kidding me." But he wouldn't be deterred so easily. If his father's friend in Sinnoh could continue to work in the underground after an unfortunate mining accident, he could climb a ladder with one arm. He would just have to get creative. Diving hungrily into his pack, he quickly attended to whatever injuries he could. A strip of cloth for a sling, a few gauze pads to dab at his bleeding head, and a mental note to examine his hip more thoroughly once he was back at the surface. Satisfied with his rudimentary first aid, Stephen cradled his makeshift sling against his chest and shakily lurched to his feet. The room spun again, and it took every ounce of strength to stay upright, his hips screaming in protest. Auron was quickly at his side, barking in nervous concern. Swallowing thickly, Stephen waved Auron off before slowly limping his way over to the ladder. Leaning heavily on the rungs for support, he glanced back at his pack, hoping Auron would get the message. "Rope! I need rope!" Following Stephen's gaze, Auron quickly trotted over to retrieve the pack and rifled around inside before producing the item in question in its jaws. Stephen beamed down at the helpful Pokemon as a realization struck. This Auron must have belonged to someone previously. There was no way a wild Auron could be this friendly or this intelligent without prior training. As he set to work with one hand in fashioning the harness his father had taught him, he could only wonder why a trained Auron would be wandering around Granite Cave alone. What had happened to its trainer? Stephen frowned as he fumbled with the knots. It certainly wasn't unheard of for trainers to meet an untimely demise by getting too curious for their own good. He shivered to think how close he had come to being a tick mark in the column of that statistic. But he had his pack, and he had a friend, and he was going to get himself out of here. He worked quickly to loop the harness around himself and tie it off behind the ladder, getting some help from Auron to make sure his hitches were snug. Taking a deep breath, he tested the ropes as he hoisted himself up on the first rung. With a silent prayer that his strength could hold out until he reached the top, he looked back towards Auron with a smile that he hoped didn't look too much like a grimace. "I'll see you at the top."